I'm joined today by one of the voices of the European Tour, Rob Mullarkey. Rob, how are you?
I'm very well today, thank you, Burton.
And thank you for coming on. And we'll come on to how you got involved in commentating on the PDC in just a minute. But where did your interest in wanting to be a reporter and commentator first come from?
Well, I'm not much good at playing sport. I love sport, I always have done. Not all sports by any stretch of the imagination, but I quickly realised by the age of 11 or 12 that I was never going to make it as a pro footballer or a tennis player or golfer. So I decided to hone in on the next best thing, which is watching it, reporting, and making a living out of talking about it as well. And it's been a long road. A few bumps and twists and turns along the way. Didn't quite work out initially how I wanted it to, and had to take a deviation into banking early on in my career. But soon enough, I turned things around and got myself on the right track.
You mentioned starting out, some of your first work was for BBC Radio Leeds and Radio York in your first years as a broadcast journalist. What was it like in those early years, cutting your teeth in the business?
Very different, not very well paid either, I've got to say. I mean, at the same time, the thing was I was working initially part-time and then full-time for a football website called Planet Football, and then teamtalk.com. They were both based in Yorkshire, so that's why I got into, and I lived in Yorkshire at the time as well, and that's how I got into just helping out with Radio Leeds and just trying to find any sort of avenue into journalism, whether it be printed journalism or broadcast journalism. Radio Leeds and subsequently Radio York were kind enough to take me on, and it was a great learning curve because, I wasn't obviously thrust into, covering Leeds United straight away. It was all about, cutting your teeth at the lower level, going to watch Oxford Albion playing in the Northern Premier League and keeping an eye on their promotion campaign, interviewing the manager, watching the game, going back to the studio, editing it up and doing a brief roundup of the non-league action. And it was a good learning curve and a good lesson in I suppose, just managing your time and, making a good 3-minute edit with what seems to be very limited material. But it's all about just making the best of what you've got at your disposal. And it was good. And then I got, slightly bigger assignments, covering what is now League Two with Halifax Town and reporting on Huddersfield Town's final day escapology act. I think that was in 2001. I was keeping an eye on Palace at Stockport that day because Palace were also involved in a relegation dogfight. So it became bigger, and then I was covering FA Cup ties around weekends, such things. And that's when I really got a taste for it. That's when I really thought, this is where I definitely want to go. But still had, much work to do after that.
Now, of course, 2015 is when you made the big promotion from football to darts, going on to cover the PDC on the European Tour. Before then, what had your interest been like, and what was it a sport that you followed much in the past?
Not religiously, certainly. I won't lie and say that I was, a regular at. I watched the big tournaments on TV, for example, especially the World Championship, World Match Play, but by no means a religious convert. I went to a few Premier League evenings in Sheffield when I was living in the north of England, and that's when it really began to sort of take hold a little bit. And then, I suppose, working for Sky Sports News Radio, when I was working on their internet output for their radio station in Leeds, I got the opportunity to speak to a few darts players. I was previewing Premier League nights on a Thursday afternoon, speaking to people like Adrian Lewis, Dave Chisnell, people who were happy to sort of lend their ear for 10 minutes or so. And I started digging a little deeper and got to realise there was something about these guys as individuals, as personalities, as well as being, talented sportsmen. And you know what the thing was? I used to watch darts more regularly then in the pub, for example. It would be on. I used to go to a real, dare I say, a very working man's club pub environment on a Thursday evening, and it would be packed. People watching the darts, and I could easily see then why these people were grits, and it just sort of flicked a switch inside me, and there was a bit of a spark there. And then, I didn't really pursue it a great deal until I went freelance after leaving Sky in 2015, and I had the opportunity to work on the Players' Championship finals at Minehead for the radio coverage. Dan Dawson, who normally did it, or had normally been doing it, had been elevated to ITV4 that weekend, and the guy that assigned the roles needed a stand-in, and this contact knew me and knew what I'd been doing, so he decided to take a chance. And it stemmed from there. Dave Allen seemed to be the media manager at the PDC, seemed to be happy with what I was doing. I was providing the PDC website with some fairly decent interviews, even though I'd never really done a face-to-face interview before with the top players. And again, it was great. I interviewed, God, it was countless. What it's like at the Players' Champs. There's what seems like to be a constant turnover of matches and interviews to be done. It was just relentless. It was brutal, to be honest, but it was really hard work. But it was just such an absorbing afternoon and an evening session on the first day, and I really, really got to grips with it very quickly. It was late nights, early mornings, but really, really got to grips with it and really enjoyed it. And I thought, this is definitely a sport that I want to pursue now in terms of being a reporter / broadcaster.
Now, we've seen the European Tour really grow into a big part of the PDC calendar over the years, starting from 5 events before you were involved to 8 and now up to 13. What have you made of the growth of it, following it closely at the various venues, the ever-changing venues, and in the commentary box?
Yeah, I mean, you just have to see how diverse it's becoming now with the new venues that are coming onto the scene this year. We're starting off in Belgium, of course, this weekend, and then we've got, the Czech Republic returns again for a second instalment, and Hungary as well, and we've been in Denmark for a couple of years now. At first, when I went to these tournaments, I didn't really know what to expect. My first tournament was at Hildesheim in 2015, and I was just staggered by the numbers that were turning up on a Saturday evening in particular, and for the final day as well, especially. I had no idea how big darts was. I was obviously aware of players like Max Hopp and, to some extent, players who were, other players who were coming through at the time, but I just did not have any idea how big it was as an event, as a sporting thing to go to in Germany. And again, it really just opened my eyes as to how big it is. You notice a difference with the crowd sometimes. The Dutch can be a little bit more boisterous. The Germans are a very knowledgeable crowd, but they certainly know how to party as well. The Danes can be a little bit more reserved. So you get these little quirks of national traits, I suppose, everywhere you go. Even in Germany, the east of Germany is obviously very different to the more affluent south and west of Germany. So you have that more reserved crowd in Munich, for example, as well at the tournament that's traditionally held at Easter time. That's very different to the boisterous nature of the crowd that you'll get in Riesa or in somewhere like Mannheim, for example. And it's interesting to watch it from that point of view, but it has been great to see it grow. I mean, I have noticed year on year that overall the crowds have been getting larger and larger. And, it's got to the extent now where venues or fans in certain countries are clamouring or demanding a European Tour event. And I think that's pretty telling.
Well, I won't ask you then about the crowd in Gibraltar, but let's talk the World Championships for a second. You made your debut recently on TalkSport 2 for their coverage of the World Championship. How did that come about, and what's it like commentating on darts on the radio compared to a live stream on PDC TV?
Well, firstly, in response to your first question, one of the other things I do as a freelance reporter is I work for TalkSport as a news bulletin writer, editor, and broadcaster. So I effectively read the news for the TalkSport network, which also covers Talk Radio and also Virgin Radio as well. I've always had I have an interest outside of sport as well. I like to keep myself on top of current affairs, and I've never wanted to totally shy away from that or totally, distance myself from that as well. I've always kept that idea open of working in mainstream news media as well. So TalkSport has been the ideal platform to combine news reading, news editing, news production, and also sports broadcasting as well. So it's a good marriage for me. Luckily, I joined TalkSport in the summer of last year, 2019, and I suppose through hard work and a combination of them knowing that I do have a darts background, they decided to get me on board. They had a particular shift one evening in the early stages of the World Championship where other more established commentators with TalkSport were committed already to covering football, for example. And so I was invited to stand in for initially one, maybe two assignments. So again, that was great. That was really good. Working with Paul Nicholson helped because obviously I know Paul very well from the European Tour, so I knew I had a ready-made contact. But then, of course, it opened me up to working with other established broadcasters such as Chris Mason, Nigel Pearson, Ian Dancer as well, and others from TalkSport. And it is very different. And talking of dance, he wrote an article on his website about how darts on the radio works. I've never been in any doubt myself that darts on the radio doesn't work. I mean, if you can apply that argument to other sports. If you are a doubter, you can apply that argument to other sports. Tennis works great on the radio. Golf works brilliantly on the radio. Boxing especially works very well on the radio. Athletics is, you listen to someone like Mike Costello on Five Live. He is a sublime commentator when it comes to covering athletics and latterly boxing as well. And I think sports that have a visual emphasis do work really well on the radio. So I was never in any doubt that darts would work. But I read his piece, Ian Dancer's piece on his website about how darts does work on the radio, and it's true because you have this natural backdrop of the crowd. You have this metronomic thud of the board. It's like a drum beat continually going throughout the track of the commentary. And when you have that background noise, it just lends itself to great radio. You have the interjections of Russ Bray or George Noble, for example, and then you have the interspersed amongst all that, you have players popping into the studio. They're happy to come into the commentary booth and have a quick word about the match that's just gone on, talk about their next match as well. So you've got that really good live elements as well in terms of both analysis and commentary, whilst providing this atmosphere. And you're painting a picture, and of course it is very different. It's like commentating on any sport. I've commentated on football on the radio and on TV, and it is very different. Tennis as well. I've done that on TV, and to some extent I've reported on tennis verbally as well on the radio. And you are doing a very different job, and you are obviously having to paint more of a picture with the words you say, and you've got to be very clever with your vocabulary as well. And yeah, it was a sharp learning curve. It was straight in. Never done darts on the radio before, but I'd like to think I did an okay job because I was asked back and to do more shifts, and eventually was lucky enough to get invited to do the final as well, which was an absolute dream come true.
Yes, and congrats on that. And let's now look ahead. First event of the European Tour this weekend, as you mentioned, the first one in Belgium. We'll also be going to Hungary later in the year. How much are you looking forward to those new venues, and is there anywhere you'd like to see the Euro Tour go if you got to make the call?
Good question. Well, luckily, I don't do every European Tour event that's on the calendar. I split most of them with Chris Murphy, for example. But I will be going to Hungary, and I will be going to Belgium this weekend as well. And I'm really looking forward to both. I think, firstly, Belgium this weekend has been, long overdue a European Tour event. It has hosted the European Championship. The venue we're going to this weekend, the venue in Hasselt, has hosted the European Championship on a few occasions. So it's the natural choice. It's a superb arena. It's very big as well, but it lends itself to a boisterous darts tournament. And I think the players will be happy going there because it's an environment that many of them will know. And it's convenient too. It's not too far to go for most of the UK-based players. Good transport connections as well. The hotel's very near to the stadium, near to the arena. So I think the players will get a lot out of it. And I think Belgium, like I say, it's been crying out for a European Tour event. Given the players they've produced, Dimitri van den Berg lately, a World Youth Champion, of course, a couple of years ago, or 3 years ago now. And the Hybrex brothers, I should say, have been flying the flag for Belgium for some time. There's one or two others coming through now as well, and there's an appetite for darts in Belgium. So I think this weekend will be good. I think the ticket sales have been very strong as well. So I think even on the Friday there should be a decent turnout, and Saturday and Sunday even more so, and especially as it comes on the back of a Premier League weekend as well. So there is this appetite, and also we're starting slightly earlier this year as well. We're starting about a month earlier than we did last year. So I think it's been a long time since Gibraltar 5 months ago at the end of September, so I think there's a bit of a clamour for European Tour darts. And I think Hungary will do a really good job. I think, one or two people have argued that there were other countries ahead of Hungary in the pecking order. I think a few observers of the game were going for Poland, given everything that Ratajski has done of late. But I think Hungary is nicely allied with Austria as well. And we have, of course, our female scorer, Daniela, Bogdanov, who is from Hungary herself, and we've seen the likes of a few players coming through from Hungary as well, competing in the Eastern European qualifiers and on the World Cup scene as well. So I think Hungary will do a good job. I really do.
And then one last question. Along with darts, you cover football and tennis. What would you say has been your favorite moment in the commentary box so far out of everything you've worked on? And you can go outside those sports as well if it comes from another one.
Wow, that is a really good question. I think, I hand on heart, and I'm not just saying this because I'm doing a darts podcast, but I think I'd have to say the World Champs final. Peter Wright against Michael van Gerwen was just an electric atmosphere. It's one of the most iconic darting venues in the world, if not the most iconic darting venue in the world, apart from Hildesheim, of course. But that was just it was just such a high standard as well. It was a really good contest. Great to see Peter Wright becoming the oldest first-time world champion, and I think again it was a success that was long overdue. And just to see his reaction afterwards and how much it meant to him firsthand, and just to watch the man celebrate close up like that was great. Yeah, there have been good moments as well. Working on some of the the cut and thrust of promotion relegation battles on the football, when you put that all or nothing afternoon, for example, at the final day of the season, that is a very different drama in its own right. And yeah, there's been the occasional tennis match which has also got me on the edge of my seat. But I think for that moment in particular, the World Champs final between Wright and Van Gerwen. But the European Tour, you know what, it's consistently producing great moments for me. We often have a chat at the end of the season about how or what was the best moment of the European Tour campaign, and you can easily make a case for 15, 20, 25 standout memories each and every year that I've been involved, and I'm pretty sure that 2020 will be the same.
Well, I was going to add one more question about the big match tomorrow at the Riverside, but I won't ask you about that one. Rob, thanks so much for joining us, and enjoy Belgium this weekend.
Thank you very much, Ben.